I know we hear a lot about how this time it's going to be different, especially with a kicker, but Will Reichard really is. Let me explain. Welcome to Locked On Vikings.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Howdy, everybody. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day, each and every day. I appreciate you all so very much for coming and hanging out, especially in July. Although, hey, camp is like around the corner, so we're coming. Welcome in to everybody who is new as well. If you're just showing up for the first time, you're looking up Vikings podcast to get into for the season. Hello and welcome. You can find this show anywhere you find your favorite podcast. Just search out Locked On Vikings, and you can also find it on YouTube or Amazon Fire and Roku. Just download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Today on the show, we are going to continue with the Everyman series, where we go over the journey to the NFL for each new Minnesota Viking, from the undrafted rookies to established veteran free agents. And today we're going to tell a kicking story. If you want kicking analysis or a preview of Will Reichard, listen to Monday's show. This is going to be a little bit more about his journey. But first I want to ask you to take a trip down memory lane with me. Do you all remember the Kick Six? 2013, you all watched that, right? Auburn, Alabama, a tie game in the waning seconds. Adam Griffith lines up for a 57-yarder. It comes up short, and Auburn's Chris Davis returns at 109 yards for the go-ahead score, game-winning score, one of the most exciting moments in Iron Bowl history and Auburn history, one of the most brutal defeats in Alabama history. A 12-year-old Will Reichard sat there with his dad, Gary, and watched it. And as improbable as it sounds, he may have, even back then, known that he was personally going to be the guy to heal that wound. The Reichards lived in the Birmingham area. They went to a high school called Hoover. And around when Will Reichard was like 9 or 10, he wandered onto the field at Hoover High School and started kicking. And it like at a high school practice, like you can do, like you're only using half the field or whatever, and somebody else is just kicking field goals. And the head coach there at Hoover like noticed this child like kicking real field goals and was like, "Whoa, that's not normal. How can he possibly do this?" This is going to be a story. Honestly, there's a lot of parallels with JJ McCarthy's, where it's just this kid that everyone is so excited about, and you just have to wait for him to get to your level of the sport. You know, you're seeing this 10-year-old going, whoa, this kid can kick. Can't wait till he's in high school and he can be on my team. The question is, though, how in the world did he get that good? How does a 10-year-old learn how to kick field goals? Because there aren't like youth football programs don't have kickers. They don't bother with kicking. They'll either just make it so if you score a touchdown at 7 points, or they'll have some kind of 2-point conversion thing. They don't have kickers line up and try, usually. I'm sure maybe some of you have your kids in a youth program that do, but that's not like common. So you don't find like a lot of ways to practice before actual high school football. So what most high school football teams will do, this is 95% of kickers, will be a soccer player, and the high school team needs somebody to kick. And soccer players know how to kick, so they'll hold a tryout and say, hey, anybody on the soccer team, come on and figure it out. And you take the best kid from there, and that's going to be where most kickers come from. Or they'll come from other sports. They'll come from the actual world of soccer, maybe not even America. A lot of kickers are from European countries or are, South Africa, like Greg Joseph, that emphasize soccer and the athleticism of kicking more than the athleticism of running and hitting and tackling like we do in American football here in the United States. But now Will Reichard did play soccer as a kid. His dad, Gary, had him in soccer, but equally had him constantly working on kicking. And to do that, they had to expend a lot of resources to get around the country to go to different like kicking camps. There are programs that are specifically for kicking field goals and kickoffs and punting, like specialist camps that are for youth, but they aren't exactly in every town. You got to go chase these around the country. So Will Reichard's childhood was basically him and his dad traveling around the country, going on road trips together, going on little weekends together, and going to these kicking camps. It turned into the nature of their relationship together, where they bonded over kicking, over this kind of hard work, over practicing together all the time. In the same way that, your relationship with your father might be around, we always watch the Vikings games together, right? And sometimes when you get really busy, that might be the only time you spend together, and it grafts onto your relationship in a way that I think is really beautiful. This happened, but with kicking, to Will and his father, Gary. One of these programs is called Chris Saylor Kicking, which is still going on, and they have events and competitions and lessons and stuff all over the country. Chris Saylor had a short-lived stint in the NFL. He was a college kicker, and then he did like some AFL stuff was the thing at the time. He was the spring league at the time. And he kind of had his short-lived like stint as a kicker, but his real impact on the world has been as a kicking trainer. He is one of the foremost experts in the world at training kids how to kick. And so it's a lot of youth programs. It's a lot of high school age programs. And this is one of the ones that Will Reichard would go to all the time. But like he was young. He was at the youngest end of when you were allowed to start signing up for this. So most of the kids there were older. So he trots out there. He's in like 5th grade and he's not doing as well as the other kids who are older and stronger and bigger. And he gets really discouraged that he wasn't like keeping up. But in reality, like if you adjust for the age, he was way ahead of the curve and kicked as though he maybe belonged amongst this group, but just wasn't the best in it, which he was way ahead of that curve, right? So if you kind of take that and then you go trot onto a football field and you apply the normal expectations you would have for a 10-year-old, you can see why that caught some head coaches' eyes. His dad constantly had him working at this, and there was very clearly a vision for creating a kicker in American football in a way that will make him stand out just by virtue of it not being a secondary thing. That's going to be the way you get most special teamers. If you think about like the Andrew De Paola story, he never even long snapped. Best long snapper in the league, by the way. Never long snapped until college, until he didn't make it as a quarterback. You think about like a lot of punters, they want to be a tight end and then they kind of take on punting because someone needed to punt and then it turns out they're really good at it. Or players who played a different sport, like all the soccer players that turn into kickers. But you very rarely see somebody that like grew up saying I'm a kicker. That's my identity, is that I kick and I'm a kicker, in the same way that the JJ McCarthy identity became quarterback as he was growing up and how his brain just was only quarterback. So maybe it's this sort of unique commitment to it, or maybe it's just God-given talent, but he is this like highly touted, highly visible kicking prospect in the state of Alabama all the way throughout his football playing childhood career. It's like a real life baby Gronk, but for kicking. Like colleges are like into him immediately. He's getting calls from SEC schools before he even starts. Before he even starts as a freshman, he's getting like attention. But his freshman year, early in 2016, was the spring of his freshman year, everything changed. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by Gametime, which is the best place to find last-minute tickets. If you are looking to get to an NFL game, I strongly encourage you to go check out Gametime right now. So they have their flash deals, and they've got like sales that'll be big banner at the top of the app. You can't miss it. But even if you just go and pick a game, you will be able to find good seats for prices that will astound you. I mean, you can find 2 really good seats together, especially for road games, depending on the stadium, for like $100 or $200 in like lower bowl. I mean, that's like unthinkable. You can find this stuff. So I just looked at the Gametime app for Vikings games and I was absolutely floored. So go check it out. You can save up to 60% off of buying last minute too, if you're willing to kind of put it off for not only sporting events, but concerts, comedy, and all of this. You can get a panoramic view of your seat and all in pricing. That's everything, including all the fees and everything. What you will pay at checkout is said to you up front, because Gametime is not trying to hide anything from you. That's what I like about them. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. When you're done here, you can go check, and if you're craving more Minnesota sports content, go to Locked On Minnesota Sports. They've got a YouTube channel and a live feed that is 24/7, shows like this one for all Minnesota sports content. Locked On Twins, Locked On Wolves, Locked On Wild, Gophers, all the roundtable stuff. A lot to be excited about. In early 2016, just after Will Reichard has completed his freshman year of high school football, his dad gets the news that he has pancreatic cancer. They've caught it late. It is inoperable. It is incurable. It is as close to a death sentence as these things get. Pancreatic cancer is the deadliest form of cancer, at least according to, I think it's the American Cancer Society is the forefront authority on those things. You have about a 12% chance of living another 5 years. About 50% live just one. You've got about a coin flip of having a year after your diagnosis, and that includes people who catch it earlier. This is, of course, devastating news to Will and the Reichard family. Gary Reichard takes the time he has left, and he starts calling people from these kicking workshops, trainers and youth specialists and people who have worked with his son. And he tells them the news, and he says, I'm not going to be around. I want you to keep being a good example and a good role model for my kid. One of these people is Chris Saylor, who remembers still and had grown pretty close to the family. And he still remembers the voicemail that he got and just knowing by the tone of voice that something was really, really wrong. There's a day in early March where Will and his father are sitting, chatting, kind of normal day, just talking. You wouldn't know anything was wrong. And then they, get up, they say goodnight or whatever. The conversation ends. And little did either of them know that would be the last time that they would talk, because the next day, Gary Reichard would pass away. It's really devastating because Will doesn't get to kind of have his goodbye and say how much, you mean to me, Dad, how much I love you and all that. You don't get to have that sort of satisfying closure. And too often that's how it goes. You don't get that storybook moment where everybody's on their deathbed and they get to say their piece. Sometimes it's just over. And dealing with that grief is something that everybody handles in a different way. Will goes to the football field and he starts kicking. And of course he starts kicking. That is the thing that he can do that makes him feel closest to his late father. And it still is. If you watch him do any field goal, a lot of kickers will do this. They'll make the field goal, they point to the sky. And a lot of people are doing that for religious reasons. Thanks to the man above for, willing that one in or whatever. But for Reichard, he's pointing to his dad. His mom, also now a single mom, takes up the mantle of transporting Will around to all the different things he has to go to, taking off work when she can to watch his games, and sort of having to suddenly become two people. She's got to be mom, and now she's got to be dad too. And he is forever grateful to the sacrifices that required as well. This story is about to get worse. It's Reichard's sophomore year after all of this. He'll spend his summer spending a lot of time alone on the field, just kicking. Just clear head, just alone with his thoughts and the football and the uprights. Of course, his coach will be the Hoover head coach will kind of have an eye on this whole situation. And he has a bigger support system than would be like physically visible in these moments. There's a lot of people that care about this kid. But hey, if he wants to be alone, he wants to be alone, right? But before his sophomore year, he will tear his ACL. And he'll miss his whole sophomore year of football. He didn't really play a lot freshman year, and now he's not going to play sophomore year either. So now, the two things that he has grafted the most onto his identity, his father and football, are taken away from him. And he reflects on this time now. If you ask him about it, he says, that was awful. He really had to learn how to be a different person, how to find an identity outside of all of those things. And it's a really tough time. And he turns to where a lot of people, especially in the U.S. in the South, turn to when they're at their lowest, which is faith. He turns to the church, and he really finds a grounding there. Faith really helps him. It gives him kind of a bedrock to stand on, if that makes sense. And it does with a lot of people. Faith and memories of his father will carry him through all the way until today. This becomes like the third pillar of his personality, really. And he's really grateful for that. And you can understand the comfort that comes from that. Even if you aren't a religious person, I'm not, but I understand the idea of, all of this really, really sucks. But if it's God's plan and there's a reason for it, it's so much easier for me to kind of make my peace with it, right? And to understand that, I have this faith in the man above and the grander plan of things. And there is something to that not only can give you comfort, but can keep you motivated to keep putting one foot in front of the other. I think that's what a lot of people get out of it. Most of the college recruitment process happens after this sophomore year for him, where he doesn't kick at all. And so most of these colleges haven't really seen him play in years. So it makes the whole thing a little weird. He's class of 2019, and he, in spite of all of that, is the number one kicker in the nation. He is this hyped up of a guy just coming out of all of the kicking camps. And I think when you are a college, it's this weird thing. Colleges don't often give a scholarship to a kicker. A lot of times they'll do the soccer thing. They'll just take somebody who's already on the soccer team and say, maybe you can do it with me. Or they'll just let people walk on and just let it be a competition all the time because we want to use our scholarships on positions from scrimmage. And if they are going to give out a scholarship, you don't necessarily have scouts dedicated to going and watching kickers. You can get high school kicking stats, and you can see if anybody made it. And honestly, if you're going to send a scout, they're probably just looking, did he make all his kicks or not? But what you do is you talk to the experts. You talk to the people at the kicking camps and all of the competitions and the kicking tournaments and the summer weekends and all these things that Will Reichard has been at all of these. So everybody in the world of kicking, the community of football kicking and youth and teaching and training, everybody knows that this kid is here. He's been working since he could toddle around, and that he's special. And so even though you don't get a lot of high school tape on him or anything like that, because it's kicking, you didn't really want that anyways. You wanted the endorsement from the camps, which Will Reichard has more than earned. So he gets a lot of attention. He's getting calls from SEC schools. He gets a ton of offers. He's got it narrowed down to 3. And at the end of the day, he chooses the Alabama Crimson Tide, which is, we'll say it's an interesting pick at the time. Alabama in 2018, when these decisions are being made, is, of course, the juggernaut of juggernaut programs. But if you were going to ask what the problem is with the Alabama Crimson Tide, ask anybody in Alabama that year, they're going to say kickers. They're snake bitten. Not only are you just a few years removed from the kick six, which is fresh in everybody's memory, it's only 5 years later, you have names like Austin Jones, who is stepping up to be the kicker at the time, who's already had struggles in that 2018 season. You have Andy Papanastos, who missed a 36-yarder to win in the college football championship. And for all of the NFL players that Alabama produces, constantly several players in the top round of the draft, the last time a Bama kicker even got a snap in the NFL was 1987. And that guy didn't even play one full year before he was ousted from the league. The only other Alabama kicker in their whole history that actually had a career in the NFL was in the 60s. This is not where you go to be a pro kicker. And maybe that's because of Nick Saban, who has that same thing. If you remember, Mike Zimmer with Blair Walsh being too hard on him, or Daniel Carlson or whatever. That's not a guy that you're comfortable kicking for, and maybe there's too much pressure because Nick Saban's too hard on you and everybody's missing their kicks. Whatever it is, Alabama and kicking was just this bugaboo. And you would think that in the recruiting process, the bugaboo of kicking would make a kicker not want to go there, right? You don't want to go somewhere cursed where you can go from, like if you look at Austin Jones, who was a very highly touted kicker coming out, didn't sniff the NFL by the end of it. That is where kickers go to die. And Will Reichard, the ripe age of 17, is exactly after that. He, not only does he just like want to rise to the challenge, he's a Tide fan. He grew up watching the kick six and all these other misses going, someday I got it, right? Knowing he was going to be a kicker and knowing that he was in the area of Alabama, like he's going to go to the hometown school if he can, right? Like imagine being a highly touted kicker. Like imagine being, if this were the pros, right? If you were a highly touted and recruited kicker, and let's say there's no draft, you can pick your place, and looking at the Vikings and saying, well, they've got that Gary Anderson thing, that Blair Walsh thing, that Daniel Carlson thing. Yeah, that's why I want to go there. I want to reverse the curse. That's what he sets out to do at Alabama. That is the inspiration that he takes. And maybe the only regret he has about this whole process is that he isn't able to talk to his dad about all this stuff. And maybe a different decision would have come out if his dad were there to, have some different thought, but who knows if maybe he would have agreed to, who knows. At any rate, he goes to Alabama, and unless his demeanor has changed, by the way, I would guess that he does look at the snake-bitten history of Vikings kickers and goes, well, that's what I'm here to do then. I'm here to turn that around. I would bet that that's the mindset. Reichard would redshirt as a freshman, and in typical and familiar Alabama fashion, he watched his predecessor fall apart. This was the 2019 Alabama Crimson Tide. A down year for them, meaning they went into the last week of the season with one loss instead of being undefeated, because that's how college football works when you're Alabama. It's the Iron Bowl again. They're down a field goal. They went in number 5 in the country, so they need a win and some help to get into the college football playoff, and Alabama had been in the college football playoff, correct me if I'm wrong here, every single year that it had existed until now. This is the closest that they've ever been to not being in it. John Belovis is the kicker for the 2019 Crimson Tide, and he trots on for a game-tying 30-yarder, and he doinks it. And for what will be the last time, Will Reichard has to sit and watch as his beloved Crimson Tide lose something heartbreaking thanks to a kicking debacle. This is the last time that he's not going to have control over that. Because his sophomore year, he will end up getting the start at kicker. Belovis will be a backup kicker. He'll be on the roster, but he won't ever see the field. He'll eventually transfer to Vanderbilt. And Bama would miss the CFP that year. And then the next year was 2020. Things get unprecedented. But for the SEC, which holds a full season, Alabama plays all 13 games. And for the Crimson Tide, if you just watched what was going on the field, you would barely know there was a pandemic outside. This was Alabama. The rules were more lax. We actually had fans in the stands for a lot of these. Maybe all of them, if I recall. And it's classic Alabama. They're crushing everybody. They will go 13-0. They will win the national championship. You may remember that season. You may remember that particular national championship. It was the Ohio State-Alabama Natty. If I say the words Tough Borland, college football, especially Ohio State's fans, will shrink into a singularity. But that was the year they had Devonta Smith and Jalen Waddle, Bryce Young throwing them the ball, your classic vaunted Alabama defense. They crushed everybody. They won the Natty by like 30 points. There was no drama to it at all. And quietly, amidst that run of absolute domination, the kicker had a perfect season. Will Reichard made 84 of his 84 extra points and 14 of his 14 field goals. By the way, the phrase 84 extra points is absolutely hilarious. College football is a disaster. And amidst the rest of his career, I think that perfect season really cements it. He kicks a perfect year, his first year as an Alabama Crimson Tide. Imagine a Vikings kicker kicking a perfect season and the Vikings winning the Super Bowl in 2024. Being that, and of course it's a different context, right? Because Alabama expects to win the Super Bowl, and this would come out of total nowhere for the Vikings. This would be if this happened for Appalachian State, but not App State. It'd be if it happened for Texas. No, Auburn. If Auburn won, because they're always good, but not the best. But young first-year quarterback, kicker has a perfect season, completely undoing this whole bugaboo, and it's story like 8 on the year of just like total domination. It cements his legacy. And if you ask any Alabama fan now about the name Will Reichard, they'll say, he's the greatest kicker in college history because he's got the most points in college history. So they'll probably make that argument. And that it's, he's this like beautiful legacy Crimson Tide. He'll never have to buy a drink in the state of Alabama again. There are 2 moments in this run of domination. There's game winners everywhere, and there's, blowout, salt in the wound kicks too. But there's 2 moments worth stopping for. And by the nature of it being a kicker, they're misses. Because when he makes the field goal, it is not remarkable. There's no drama to it. But when he misses the field goal, everybody writes an article, right? There's one in Tennessee against Tennessee in 2022. Game's tied 49-49. It's been this like really back and forth game. And he pushes a 50-yarder to the right with 21 seconds to go. The Volunteers take over. They need like 2 first downs, and then they go kick their own as time expires, and they lose. And that's the first time that Reichard is really like a true scapegoat. He's missed kicks in the past. He had a miss in a high school all-star game specifically for recruiting purposes. He would miss his only field goal there, but he had already committed to Alabama, so the pressure wasn't really on. But here the pressure was on, and it was a game winner. It should have been the thing, and he loses, and he misses, and they lose. The other one is in LSU in 2023. He will miss both of the last field goals that he would kick in Alabama. I believe that would be a brutal 9-6 loss. This was, the 2023 Crimson Tide were kind of a shell of their former selves right now, and there's no Nick Saban and all that. But regardless, the sort of hype surrounding this guy is cemented. He could go out on a really bad streak and you still kind of wouldn't care because of what he's already accomplished. And so that's what gets him all the NFL attention and all that. He's not even the first kicker off the board, interestingly, but Matt Daniels falls in love with him. He gets drafted. Here he is on another snake-bitten franchise, trying to make things different. And so the answer to the question, why should I believe, which is a very valid question, why should I believe that this kicker will be different? Historically, drafting kickers has not worked out for basically anybody, except maybe Sebastian Janikowski on the Raiders. And if you want an answer to that question, it's that it already has been. Be back tomorrow, probably more Everyman series. We'll see if there's news. There's some Cam Akers rumors swirling around, so maybe that'll sort of calcify. We'll see. But I'll talk to you tomorrow. And as always, Skull.